Yeah, thank you so much for the amazing introduction. I had a little moment of self-reflection realizing that this book is now out there actually. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to everyone who took the time out of their day to come listen to me or perhaps later on watch it online. Yes, this is a project that's very dear to my heart. It's the result of many years, close to 7, of researching and writing about this. So it is a pleasure for me to now speak about it and to have such a diverse audience as well. So, to get started, I actually decided to choose some headlines of different events going on around the world related to Amazon. Now, this is a collection of different headlines just from the last month. And if we start on the top left, we see that there is apparently a move by Amazon to expand in physical grocery stores. I found this particularly interesting because we know that Amazon, started out taking the physical stores online, and now, as maybe a demonstration of its growing power and its ecosystem, it is going back to opening up stores. If we go to the bottom left corner, this is a headline that to me exemplifies how Amazon is very much interested in technological developments, in this specific case of robotaxis on Californian streets. If we go to the bottom right corner, I found this one interesting because it shows that the word Amazon is actually, becoming a noun, a verb of its own. So we're speaking about the Amazonification of production, of logistics, of the supply chain. So a lot more, let's say, parts of the economy are looking to Amazon as a model, perhaps a model of efficiency. And the last two headlines are related to what is especially interesting to me, looking at workers, is the recent events of workers, in this specific case in Europe, of organizing strikes and walking out for better working conditions. One is in relation to Barcelona, because Amazon announced closing a warehouse there, and the other one is related to the UK, where we have seen the first strikes in Amazon's history in the UK. Now, a very fun exercise for me is actually to take a look at the share prices of Amazon. So I'm just going to break this down in very simple terms. Um, Over here, which is much lower than where it was in 21 and 2022, this is the share price. In 2018, it was around, here it says 75 US dollars on the 23rd of Feb. The interesting thing is, although this looks somewhat low compared to 2020 to 2022, at this time, Jeff Bezos had become the richest human being in the history of this planet. So this is just as a sort of demonstration of the amount of wealth that was accumulated during the pandemic, and why, if we were to want to identify a so-called winner of the pandemic, Amazon would be very much at the top of this list. Now, this growth of Amazon has also been reflected not just in its financial capital, so how much, share prices are in stocks, but also we see this in terms of its workforces and how many warehouses it has opened up. In a country like Germany, you may know, you may not know, Germany is the largest market for Amazon outside of the US. So that's why Germany is a particularly interesting case. We've seen that Amazon was booming in Germany over the course of the pandemic. And Germany is also, as a side note, especially interesting because it is the country with the longest labor struggle. So the first strikes at an Amazon warehouse happened here in Germany. Now, over here on this graph, we can also see the size of, or the extents, the dimensions by which the Amazon workforce has increased over the course of the last years. So I started my PhD project in 2016 at the time, where you see like now it doesn't really look like it's too much compared to what it became. But I can tell you back at the time, we were already talking about how it was growing exponentially. Now the big jump we can see again between 2019 and 2020 with the pandemic. And within the first 6 months of the pandemic, the workforce also more or less doubled. Something to keep in mind here, though, is that this workforce and this numbers provided by Statista are actually, which are also calculated, of course, do not account for seasonal and contracted workers. This is especially important in the case of Amazon because Amazon hires the largest number of seasonal workers during Q4, which means Black Friday and over the Christmas season. So when we want to talk about labor organization, it becomes particularly interesting to think about how the turnover rate, so the number by which more and new people enter the warehouse, is actually the time at which the most orders come in. So how would you mobilize these new workers? Just as a thought to keep at the back of our minds. So as you can see, Amazon is growing. Of course, it's a question mark after 2022 with a lot of platforms now resorting to job cuts. Amazon is no different in that way, but it will be interesting to see how this develops. But overall, we can say it's really difficult to avoid Amazon nowadays. Amazon is not just the e-commerce platform. So maybe you order on Amazon, maybe you don't, but I would encourage you to take a look at how many other websites you go to or how many platforms you go to that actually operate via Amazon Web Services and its cloud platform. So in a way, Amazon is very much intrinsic to the internet. It's become intrinsic to the internet. So in today's talk, I would like to present to you my research based on 3 different parts. First of all, I'd like to reflect a bit on my own motivations, what got me started, why did I decide to focus on Amazon and platforms, and what this book is really about. And I'd like to hint here, I said diving in, but it's really just hinting at the 2 case studies, because I keep mentioning Amazon warehouses, but this is not a book about the Amazon warehouses. That's a part of the book. The other part of the book is Amazon Mechanical Turk. And then finally, I'd like to take a step back and just reflect on Amazon's positioning in the larger platform economy. So how did I end up investigating Amazon? I come from a political economy background. I'm very much interested in what's going on in capitalism, what are new developments, and I'm very much interested within that system at looking at workers. I'm very passionate about looking at workers' research or doing workers' research because, you know, it gives us a way to support the labor struggles, but also to highlight the agency workers have. So in a way that workers are agents for change, they resist, they try to improve their working conditions. Now, at the time when I started the dissertation in 2016, platforms were popping up everywhere. Actually, today, I read someone who tweeted to me saying that it seems books on platforms are appearing everywhere nowadays. And I almost have to agree. The reading list is really becoming longer now with all the books coming out. But it's a very exciting moment because we have been researching platforms so much over the last years, and now the work is really being manifested and materialized. So one of the contemporary developments in capitalism is the platform economy. And I think what makes it especially exciting is the platform economy represents so much. It's not, yes, it does not hire, in relative terms, it's not like the majority of the workers of the world work for platforms. However, platforms are trendsetters and they are, in a way, reorganizing, or that's a question we could ask. To what extent are they reorganizing the way we work and the way we organize? Now, in this specific book, I look at Amazon because it is such a great representation of what's happening in the platform economy as a corporation. So in recent years, these are just a few covers of books. In recent years, a lot of new books have been published, and I'm happy, hopefully, to be considered part of this scholarship. We have Sabrina Apicella with her book in German, Das Prinzip Amazon. This Sabrina Apicella was one of the first people to look at warehouse workers. In the specific case of Germany, she was interested in why do people actually strike? So she went and did so many interviews, so many surveys with these workers. So we have a lot of new books coming up around Amazon. We have books that essentially contextualize Amazon as a platform. And I do understand Amazon, also the warehouses, as a platform. It's an e-commerce platform. So it's essentially a platform is it's about mediating between different groups via the infrastructure of the internet. In this specific case, we have the Amazon being an e-commerce platform, and it is one that is location-based. What does this mean? It means I, as a worker, have to physically go to the warehouse, to this location, to work. So within the larger platform economy, we could kind of understand Amazon as one of them. However, as we know, Amazon is not the only platform, but there's been more and more work around the gig economy where you are essentially paid by piece, right? Like a delivery worker, like an Uber driver, who are also location-based because you are physically within the locality of a city where you are offering that service. So in a way, Amazon warehouse workers are different to gig economy workers like delivery workers because they're not paid by gig. So they are more traditional in a way. However, what's also interesting in the platform economy is that not all workers are location based. So we have here the work by Gray and Surrey that talks about ghost work. I think ghost work has become once again part of the public discourse with ChatGPT and the article that really highlighted by Time about how Kenyan workers were ghost workers essentially to make ChatGPT less toxic. So in this amazing work, it really talks about how technology doesn't replace workers, it displaces them. So we see with platforms that also workers are web-based. And one example here would be Amazon Mechanical Turk, which means one worker could be located anywhere in the world and could be doing an online task. And in this specific case, they are also gig workers because they're paid by piece. So if we take a look then back and we want to sort of contextualize the platform economy, coming from a political economy perspective myself, I think it's important to understand platforms as developing in relation to societal, to technological, to political economic conditions. So in a way, it's not a coincidence that a certain kind of platform developed in a certain moment in time. So if we looked at Amazon and Google, which were created at the time of the dot-com boom, where everyone was getting really excited about the internet, Amazon and Google, we could understand them more as a bit more traditional organizing of workers, but brought sort of into the century we're in. Whereas the work relations started to really change after the 2000s, where we had gig work introduced to platforms, and we then had web-based work as well. So you may know that Amazon started as an e-commerce platform, and it then created Amazon Mechanical Turk and Amazon Web Services actually for its own use before it was rolled out. So essentially, they realized Amazon was growing so much, we need a cloud. So why go out and rent a cloud if you can build a cloud and the infrastructure that comes with it? And that's what happened with Amazon Web Services. And now you can take a look at how it has monopolized that market. In the same way, Amazon, as it was growing, we had a lot of duplicates were being posted, for example, online. So you needed a workforce to double check that. And that's how Amazon Mechanical Turk came about. Essentially, now it is, I will show in a later slide, a 24/7 workforce always available across the world to do any online task that is a micro task that you wish for. So having said that, we can see that, the platform economy really isn't uniform. So the way it organizes its workers is fundamentally can be different. And in a way, the way it organizes its workers will then have implications not only for the working conditions, but also for how workers then organize themselves, form solidarity, resist, and so forth. And that's what really inspired and led me to the question of this book, which is how do the different nature of platform, so I had mentioned two natures right now, which is location-based versus web-based, and how does also the different nature of work, meaning are you paid traditionally by time wage like an Amazon warehouse workers or by gig? So how do these two dimensions alienate workers, and how do workers then express their agency? So how do they organize? Now, the important thing is that workers of the platform economy are obviously embedded in their own context, in their own material context. Things don't develop in an abstract way. So that's one thing to keep in mind, because the context they are in can play a huge role, right? You might have certain rights that are granted to you in a certain national setting and not in another one. And the other thing that becomes incredibly interesting in the platform economy is it also allows us to think about different ways of organizing. It's not just about traditional organizing. It can be, but it must not just be about traditional organizing, but can in a way also highlight alternative ones. So essentially, while the book has Amazon in its title and it's very much using two cases of Amazon, I would say this is not just a book about Amazon. I use the two examples of Amazon warehouses and Amazon Mechanical Turk to demonstrate that kind of variety we have in the platform economy. And in a way, by crystallizing these different dimensions, we can understand, okay, how does being in a location-based workplace affect my working conditions, and how does it affect how I would want to organize, or the fact that I'm paid by piece, or the fact that I'm actually laboring from behind my screen. So that's kind of the general foundation and motivations that led me to dive into this project. Now, both of these case studies are based on original field work. So in the case of the Amazon warehouse workers, being located in Germany myself, I focused on Amazon warehouses in Germany, where I also, conducted interviews with warehouse workers. I've attended a strike before. I've attended union meetings on a national scale and on a transnational scale. And in the case of Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is then a digital shop floor, essentially, I also worked some tasks as well as posted tasks as surveys as a form sort of paid, a paid task, because essentially that's what it is. So obviously the lens we put on, the theoretical lens we put on helps us conceptualize what we're studying. And I've mentioned alienation and I've mentioned agency, but now the question arises, how do I actually study these? And I don't do it quantitatively. So alienation, I don't send around surveys asking them on a scale from 0 to 10, how alienated do you feel? Far from that. I would never want to make that claim at all as a researcher, but instead, I resort to Marx's 1844 economic and philosophical manuscripts because he highlights 4 different relations of alienation that allow us, in a way, it's a tool, an analytical tool, to help us systematically study the working conditions. So Marx speaks of an alienation to the labor activity, so essentially what kind of work I am doing, to the labor product, meaning what am I producing or circulating or working on? And then species being can be understood very abstractly as what happens to my non-working life? So how much of my life is consumed by my labor, and what can I do outside of that to kind of find fulfillment for myself? And fellow humans essentially is the alienation we may experience towards other people, how we perceive them. Do we perceive them as workers? Do we perceive them as competition? And by analyzing these 4 dimensions, in my opinion, it is a very systematic way to study the working conditions, but also provides us with part of the question of why might workers not organize? Okay. But the point is, if we were just to stop at that analysis, I would argue this is a great disfavor to research and to the workers themselves. Because while alienation can provide part of the explanation, it is only part of the explanation. If we stop here, it is as if we say workers have no agency. It is to say, I am alienated, which is intrinsically the case under capitalism. I am alienated, so I can't do anything about it. It's just the way it is. But essentially, we see that workers, as with human beings, do have agency. They find different ways by which to organize. This can be bound to here, what I've written in the middle. The bridge could be class consciousness. Of course, class consciousness for me does not mean that racialized and gendered subjectivities don't exist. In many cases, we see workers in the platform economy, as an example, come together because they share the fact that they are migrants in a country where their residence permit is dependent on their employer. So in a way, they form solidarity because of these material conditions to which they are exposed to, but can form solidarity because they speak the same language, because they are away from home, for example, or a lot of different factors. So obviously the context they are in plays a huge role. And then as a way to analytically analyze the agency of workers, I resort to the power resources approach. So in a way, the structural power is about what is my leverage on the labor market? Is my skill considered for the labor market to be low or high? Am I able to mobilize a lot of people, or how does that look? How complex is it? Can I pursue a strike, or do I have to come up with a new creative way to do that because maybe in my country I can't just go on strike? Do I unionize? Do I have institutional rights? And the societal power really refers to how much can I broaden the labor struggle to get society on board? Can I make it part of the public discourse? We saw this with COVID, right? When all of a sudden, which is something that was obviously clear, but in the discourse, we spoke so much about the essential workers. So although the labor market would consider someone working in a supermarket formally not to be a high skilled worker for the labor market, they were very much essential workers by which we needed them to be there working for us so that we could, get our food, etc. So we can see that also in moments of crisis, this discourse can shift. And also it's a question of how many people in society can we collaborate with, can we grow the cause so that we can achieve those goals, in the sense of, workers could be working together with labor organizations, they can be working together with unions, with community centers, with social movements, with politicians, with journalists. So in a way, it's about studying the labor movement from so many different facets. Now, to go into the two cases where I essentially try to analyze this and then bring it back in relation to the way the platform is organized. My first case study was the Amazon warehouses. And one of the quote that stuck with me the most was this one: "I am not a robot." This is a quote that was repeated by so many different workers. In fact, Amazon, "We are not robots," became a slogan of the labor movement, the transnational labor movement, to organize workers against Amazon. When we look at the warehouses, just to very briefly kind of fly over it, through alienation, we can really study the division of work, the division of labor that goes on in warehouses. Because warehouses, these are some images of them, a relatively modern one. Warehouses are, in a way, I always say, you can imagine them as the size of an IKEA, so relatively big, and it's subdivided in so many smaller steps. And you as a worker have to go, and the task that you're assigned, you have to do over and over and over again. So in a way, it does remind us of factory work brought into the 21st century. And when we analyze then the alienation, we can also underline what are the different ways by which, not only, because when a worker says, "I am not a robot," in a different way, it means that also workers have, or they do express, this degree of alienation, meaning that they feel like they have to work as a machine at the end of the day. And by studying the kind of platform it is, which is location based, we can actually also study what are the different forms of surveillance to which workers are exposed to. Because here in the warehouse, this can happen both socially, meaning your manager is watching you, but it also means it happens technologically, because in the end, you are connecting to the system, right? You have a hand scanner that tells you how many units per hour you have to achieve. This is called the UPH rate. And in a way, by studying then the different dimensions of alienation, we can understand how these kind of work together, these different dimensions of how workers are organized by Amazon come together in order to almost fragment the workforce, because you're under this immense productivity pressure to keep up the work. And then you see here in the middle picture the slogan, "Work hard, have fun, make history." This is one of Amazon's slogans in the warehouses. And Amazon will still then organize events to, so that we see this across the platform, where they try to create this sense of community. So then the question arises, if this is one part of the explanation, what's the other part? So on the one hand, while Amazon, as other platforms, as other corporations, really alienates through the labor itself, workers have their own consciousness, they have their own agency. However, it must also be said, just because workers would like to organize does not necessarily mean it will translate into action. And I don't mean this in any way to dismiss it. I just want to highlight that the material conditions can very much restrict workers, even if they want to organize. Again, let's take the example of Amazon is your employer on your residence permit. So you would have to really think about, are you worried about risking that? Would you be risking that status if you went on strike? It depends. All of these questions depend, of course, also on the country you live in. In the case of Amazon in Germany, we know workers are more likely, or most likely, to go on strike once they have a permanent contract, because you feel like, okay, my job is safe now. Now, the ways by which Amazon warehouse workers organize also, as we've seen, especially coming from the US, you're facing Amazon, this massive corporation that spends millions on union busting to keep workers from organizing. So amidst all of this terrain, I was trying to understand, okay, but workers are going on strike and they are mobilizing. So how do they navigate this essentially? How can they try to grow their leverage? And and pushed for those better working conditions. In the case of Germany, as you see in this image where it says work fair, have fun, make Tarifvertrag, that's because as Germany has Amazon's oldest labor struggle, they are, in this case, still fighting for the same goal, which is to get that collective bargaining agreement, which has not happened until now. And this then can go back to the question of how do workers leverage their different forms of power, how to increase these, how to strengthen these, and so forth. So on the one hand, we have then the Amazon warehouse workers, which, as I said, are location-based and receive a traditional time wage. However, a complete contrasting case now is the Amazon Mechanical Turk worker. This was one of the answers that was given to a survey question of mine, where I pretty much asked, why is it that you work on Amazon Mechanical Turk? And the worker said, I can work when I want and not work when I want. And this is something that's over and over again highlighted by different scholars, is the fact that, Amazon Mechanical Turk isn't just seen as this exploitative system, but in fact, a lot of workers may enjoy the flexibility that is given to them. So I just want to take you a step back because you may or may not be familiar with Amazon Mechanical Turk's tasks. So I went online this week and I took a screenshot of this, and this was a task that was posted this week. Tell us what this item is. So essentially, this is it. You're supposed to identify the item and identify some information related to the item. And then I went back to see also about sort of how much were you getting paid for this task. It was this final task, the one for 8 cents. So you could do that task and get 8 cents. As you can see, though, I am not someone who frequently works on Amazon Mechanical Turk, so I did not even qualify. I was not even allowed to do that task if I wanted to. I would need more qualifications for that. But what I wanted to show with this is a screenshot of how Amazon Mechanical Turk webpage looks like. Essentially, it's micro tasks like the ones I just showed you that are posted anywhere in the world, although we know that they can be predominantly stemming from the global north and workers can be predominantly located in the global south. In the case of Amazon Mechanical Turk, the workers are predominantly in the US and India. And essentially, it says here hits because they're called human intelligence tasks. So you are hired because you're a human being. Here's a little task I want you to do. I want to collect the data, and eventually this data will be used for machine learning algorithms for AI. Sometimes, though, it can just be a survey, like a market survey. Sometimes the task is, as you can see here, extract general data and items from shopping receipt, or it might ask you, please digitalize this shopping receipt. So you really, as you work these tasks, you feel that the only qualification you have here, or the only reason you're doing this task is because you are a human being. Now, Amazon Mechanical Turk, the name stems from the Mechanical Turk here. Here we see that, when they took the name over, it was because, in a way, it was referred to as artificial intelligence. So over here, this is a chess master, of course, a very Orientalist representation of a chess master. And the idea is there would be someone sitting in this box down here and would be moving basically the chess. So the idea would be that this chess master could go around, or this chess robot could go around the world, play against very big people and beat them. But essentially it wasn't in fact a robot because there was a human being sitting in there. And this is essentially who the Amazon Mechanical Turk workers are. We have a computer screen. There's people actually behind the computer screen. And in a way, I'd like to remind you back to the ChatGPT article because, artificial intelligence is not detached from human labor. There were people behind the screens who were trying to make it less toxic. In this specific case, there are human beings behind something as simple as please identify this product. Now, the fact that you are located somewhere across the world, I always say you could imagine it as being in a digital cubicle. Like you are working completely alone, isolated, wherever you are on a specific task. You never encounter neither the person that employs you nor other workers while you're working the Amazon Mechanical Turk task. And once we dive into the different relations of alienation, we can understand how much, or let's say how little, we actually know about the kind of work that we are then doing. Because if I'm identifying this item, I don't know where that information is going. I don't know what it's being used for. And also the fact with Mechanical Turk is it must not even be that I'm getting paid for my task in the end, because the task can be rejected, but the data produced can still be used, as we know from Amazon Mechanical Turk. Now, the idea is with Amazon Mechanical Turk workers, if we were to imagine then the power resources in the very strict traditional sense in relation to unions, then, we would kind of be looking for a long time for that traditional labor organization. And the thing that I find especially exciting about having a contrast case like Amazon Mechanical Turk is it shows us, first of all, what are the obstacles once you're paid by task? Because going by on a strike looks very different. If I'm striking by not doing a task online, somewhere else across the world is going to do that task. So it looks very different to if I'm walking out the warehouse. This is where the comparison starts getting really exciting. In the same way, the question is, okay, but if Amazon isn't officially my employer, then who am I organizing against? Am I organizing against Amazon Mechanical Turk or Amazon, or against the person that is posting the task and not paying me? So once we look at these power resources, it almost pushes us to think about agency in alternative ways. There's been a lot of great work done, especially by Lily Irani and Six Silberman, who actually created Turk Opticon. You may be familiar with it, where workers go online and they say, actually, we're going to rate the requesters. So the person that's posting the task, we will rate them to tell other people, maybe you should avoid them because they won't actually pay you. Now, here is a screenshot I took for you also this week from a Reddit thread on how to navigate Amazon Mechanical Turk, which I understand actually as a form of solidarity and organizing, because workers essentially are using the technology that is alienating them to instrumentalize it and to give each other advice. So yeah, perhaps it's not this traditional, we are organizing in a union and we are organizing by striking, but essentially you can see in this thread, they're asking, just getting started, wondering where to go, what to do, wondering what qualification is and how to get it. This is the place. Any common questions, will be added to the FAQ and so forth. So there's so many of these links that are helpful, and browser extensions that workers give advice to each other to how to make almost the most money within the time that you're working on Amazon Mechanical Turk. So although you don't encounter the workers on Amazon Mechanical Turk, you encounter them, if you want to, somewhere else on the internet. So having said that, now I'm going to take a step back and say, so essentially what I do in my research is I do dive into the Amazon warehouses, and I do dive into the Amazon Mechanical Turk platform to highlight really the different dimensions then, as I said. How does the nature of the platform, again, location-based versus web-based, and how does the nature of work, meaning am I traditionally paid or paid by gig, how does this affect my working conditions and how to push for better working conditions? And on that note, it is Amazon, because it's this huge ecosystem and has so many platforms of its own, it's this great example to use because it is multiple platforms at the same time. So on the one hand, this is a book about the Amazon workers, at least part of them. That's the case. It is also a book that tries to highlight the diversity of the platform economy, because this can then, in a future step, we can think about ways by which to regulate platforms. And the question arises, what are the different ways we need to then regulate different platforms? It's not one solution fits all in this specific case. It also raises questions to what regulation will look like, because if you regulate, as we've seen here with the proposal, the directive for platform work, if you were to regulate jobs like this in the global north, the question arises, what will happen to the race to the bottom? If we already know so many workers are located in the global south and we only regulate in one part of the world, what would this mean in terms of the working conditions and realities of workers elsewhere? So on the one hand, it can open up these questions, but also in a way, it helps us reflect on what I have listed here as the labor market and the labor movement. So really what I'm getting at is, what are the historical continuities we see through Amazon? So what is it reproducing? A division of labor is not new, but Amazon is bringing it to the 21st century with specific technology. But then also, what are new trends platforms are producing? As we've seen, there's a huge debate going on around algorithmic management. And in a way, new forms of surveillance, but at the same time, it's reproducing precarity essentially. So platforms and the gig economy are huge contributors, I would say, to the deregulation of the labor market, meaning that we have less and less formal employment. On the other hand, by studying these different case studies, we can also reflect on the labor movement. And I have to say, this is an extremely exciting time for the labor movement of the platform economy. We see every day there's news about not just, Amazon warehouse workers organizing, but we see so much happening with Uber drivers. We see so much happening with delivery workers. Berlin is there at the forefront right now. It's a lot of labor organization happening there. And I hope that this would also encourage us to think about, the changing nature of the labor movement. It must not be top down. It can be a grassroots initiative. It can be a grassroots movement. We've seen also the case with with this being the case in the US, with the first warehouse unionizing in Staten Island. So in a way, I hope with this book, essentially, we can also think of the traditional, but also alternative and new ways and intersectional ways by which the labor movement is in fact unfolding currently. So I'd like to end this talk with a quote from the book, which is, just as the conditions of the platform economy need to be understood historically and holistically, so through the different conditions, right? Platforms don't develop out of nowhere, but there are actual conditions by which one form of platform will grow. At the same time, we also need to think of the agency of workers in that historical and holistical way, because the ways by which workers express their agency also, relate back to the material conditions, to the technological conditions of our world today and our larger political economic context. Thank you very much.